going to start by reading a passage from the New Testament, from the Gospel of Mark. And you should be able to see that now. So this is from the New Testament, the Gospel of Mark. The general consensus is that Mark is the first and the earliest of the Gospels to be written. When the Bible was being compiled, they thought Matthew was the first and earliest gospel, which is why Matthew comes first. But the later consensus is that Mark was the first and the earliest, and the other gospel writers kind of leaned on him as a reference and as source material. Mark is the shortest gospel, but it contains so much. It's like he just jam-packed as much information in it as possible. So you really get like a condensed, concentrated version of all the stuff that Jesus did. Because even though it's the shortest, I think it contains like the most stories, the most miracles, the most everything. So we're going to be reading from Mark chapter 5. It should be on your screen now. It's a story that you may be familiar with. And I've spliced together various verses. So we're not going to cover every verse in the chapter, but I've spliced together in a way that should follow, but I'll make that clear. So starting from verse 1, it says, "They came to the other side of the lake, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him any more, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him." Verse 5, "Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones." And continuing from verse 9, "Then Jesus asked him, 'What is your name?' He replied, 'My name is Legion, for we are many.' He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there on the hillside, a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, 'Send us into the swine, let us enter them.' So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned in the lake. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. Just to be clear and upfront, I only cherry picked certain verses just to streamline it, but I do encourage you either at the end of the service or some stage in your devotion, once we've kind of heard the message, to go and read the passage in its entirety. I haven't left anything out to omit anything. It was just to kind of make it a bit more of a neater experience. So this is a passage we're going to be reflecting on, and I just invite you to just bow your heads with me as I just ask God to be with me and to be with you, to be with all of us as we reflect on his word. Dear Father, we thank you for giving us the capacity to read, to hear, to understand, but there's another step in the process that we don't have the ability to do, and that's to discern, dear Father. And so we ask for the Spirit of the living God to fall upon us at this time, to give us the ability to spiritually discern, to change these from just words on a page to words of life, words that have power, words that have the ability to speak to our hearts, to speak to our situation, to confront us, to call us out, to encourage us, to build us up, dear Father. We can't do that of our own accord. So I ask you to do that for me now, first of all, as I try to interpret, and I ask you to do that for those who are listening, both listening in real time and those who may listen later via YouTube, that your Spirit will also guide them and give them the gift of discernment as well, just so we can get as close to the meaning and the message that you want us to discern from this text. Thank you, Father. In your name we pray. Amen. So I find that there is a real tension that exists with trying to help vulnerable people. And this is obviously relevant to us because this is something that we try to do, we care about. And on the one hand, I find we can feel compelled by compassion, compelled by empathy, and we just feel driven. We want to help. I'm very, very proud of the fact that I've never had any pushback from anybody within our church community for the things that we try to do in the wider community, the difference that we try to make. And we clearly all like the idea of trying to help people who are down on their luck. But at the same time, the reality is, if we happen to be on our way home and we're propositioned by someone who asks us for help, and maybe they don't smell too fresh, maybe you can smell a bit of booze on their breath, we might feel a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe we feel a little bit concerned for our safety and maybe our well-being. And that's kind of the tension that exists with trying to help people. I can remember there was a lady, like she was young. I don't think she was a teenager, but she was young, right? She was a young lady, and I used to see her like a rough sleeper. I used to see her from time to time around Gants Hill, around the station area. And I remember the first time seeing her and kind of speaking to her, and she just sounded really genuine. And I know sometimes you have to take things with a pinch of salt, but I think you also have to follow your gut. And we were speaking, and she seemed really genuine about her needs, and she was telling me why she was in the situation that she was in, and I just felt I felt bad for her, and so I gave her some money. And then sometime later, I happened to see her again in like a similar area, and we got to talking again, and we were just catching up a little bit. And as we were talking, I realized that her shoes had holes in them. And so I felt like, well, this is a practical way that I can do something to help her. And so we went to Sports Direct, which was just around the corner from where I'd run into her, and I bought her some trainers. And I want to be up front. They weren't Jordans or anything, but they were something that was just adequate for the situation to keep her feet warm and dry. And she was really happy. She didn't smell too good. And I don't say that in any way as a slight on her. I say that because she lived on the street. And so as we were walking, and I was kind of just literally catching wind of the smell, a part of me thought, you know what? Just take her to your house, let her have a shower, like a hot shower. You can take her clothes, wash them, tumble dry them. So at least you've got everything clean. She feels clean. That will help her. But then another part of me started thinking, well, is it like really appropriate to take like a strange young lady into your home when no one else is there? Is it appropriate for you? Is it appropriate for her? Is it safe for anybody? And even if it is perfectly safe, what happens next? What do I do? Say, here's your clean clothes. Hope you've had a lovely shower. Now back out onto the streets you go. And I genuinely think that I would feel worse about doing that than I would about not even offering the shower and the clean clothes in the first place. Because that's a really difficult thing to do. Say, okay, back to your life on the street. Like that just felt like it would be a really difficult thing to do. And so all of these questions were kind of going around my head in real time as we were walking. And eventually just got her the shoes, and I wished her the best, and I kept it moving. And I just share that to share an example for this kind of problem, this tension that we can kind of be very mindful of. Like, I want to help you, but I'm also challenged and phased and maybe even scared by your situation and your circumstances and some of your issues. And so when I read this passage in the Gospel of Mark, the passage that we've just read and reflected on, I see a man who is incredibly vulnerable, where the only form of help or assistance that people have offered him is chaining him up, like literally with chains and shackles. Numerous times they have chained him up like an animal. Stay here. And he lives a life of isolation and loneliness, just wandering around the tombs, like literal tombstones. It's like a graveyard. And he's so troubled and disturbed by his condition that night after night, he self-harms, just pounding his body with rocks and stones for relief until he's just bloodied and covered in bruises, howling It's like they treat him like an animal, and then he starts acting like an animal. Like, how can your heart not be moved by his plight? How can you not feel sympathy for this man? Like, when I read about him, I genuinely don't even stop to think the thing that I normally stop to think, which is like, well, how did he get in this position? Is it of his own making? Did he contribute to his own downfall? Is it his bad decisions? Like, because sometimes you can, well, let me not put words in your mouth. I'll be honest. Sometimes I can find myself subconsciously asking those kind of questions and doing a mental audit when you encounter somebody who's down on their luck. But this man, with him, his situation is so dire and so brutal that honestly, I don't even think those things when I read this. I just feel sorry for him. I just want him to be helped. But at the same time, if I was ever to encounter him, I would run as fast as I could for as long as I could. I'd be dipping into the Iron Man training and mentality. Just keep going, keep running, keep pushing, keep going, keep going. Because if we're honest, he sounds terrifying. He's inhabited by a legion of demons, demons that speak for him. You speak to him and they answer. Who knows how far down in his consciousness the real man is? He's imbued with superhuman strength by the forces of darkness, like breaking shackles in pieces, wrenching chains apart. The text literally said no one had the strength to subdue him. It's terrifying. This poor man falls into the very unfortunate category where on paper you want to help him, but in reality, you would go clean out of your way to avoid him. Jesus turns up on the beach of the area where this man lives. Because Jesus is like the hero running into the burning building when everybody else is running away. Now, if you think about the words most commonly used in any description of Jesus, you'll probably hear words like kind, loving, humble, compassionate, all accurate, all valid. But I want to add a word to that list, and it's a word that I hope that you make a mental note of, and it's a word that I always want you to think of whenever you're trying to build up in your head a picture in your mind of who Jesus is. And that word is fearless. Fearless. You see, prior to arriving on this beach, literally while he was making his way and being transported, Jesus is in a boat that is in danger of being swamped by the water and by the storm that it's in. And the professional sailors who are sailing this boat are so scared because they think they're going to die. And Jesus was having a nap. Fearless. And immediately prior to that, Jesus is in a house, and it seems he's doing some preaching, some speaking, some teaching, and his mother comes to look for him, and his mother is kept waiting outside. He keeps her waiting outside, and eventually someone comes up to Jesus and they have a word in his ear. They're like, Jesus, your mother's waiting outside. And Jesus says publicly, who is my mother? Fearless. Prior to that, he heals a man on Sabbath in the presence of the Pharisees, and this was the act that made them go and conspire to assassinate him, and he knew this was going to happen. Fearless. And so Jesus goes to the beach that no man dares to go to, and he looks for the person that no man dares to seek, and he confronts the demons that no man dares to confront. Jesus is absolutely fearless. And so as these demonic forces come face to face with the Son of Man, it's clear that they recognize him and they know who he is. And they say through their human vessel, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? They know who he is. And the demons ask to be cast into a herd of pigs. And Jesus grants their request. And so they're evicted from their human host, and they enter the pigs, and they cause the pigs to go rushing headfirst off of a cliff into the Sea of Galilee. 2,000 pigs rushing and literally throwing, imagine the scene, they're throwing themselves off of the cliff into the sea to perish. It's quite the scene. It would be very unnerving to witness this. In fact, it was unnerving enough that the workers, the swineherds who actually experience, they know these pigs, they work with them, they see their moves, they see their actions. This was such an unnerving scene that the workers run off in horror to tell people what they've seen. And people hearing this, they come to investigate. They come to see this unnerving scene that apparently has taken place. And what they see unnerves them even more. They see a man who used to be chained up, who used to wander between the tombs, naked and howling, bloodied and bruised, who used to batter his own body, who couldn't be restrained. They see this man sitting quietly on the ground, wearing clothes, and in his right mind. And they're afraid. Perhaps they subscribe to the same broken theology as the scribes that we read about in the same Gospel of Mark, in Mark chapter 3, just a couple of chapters earlier, when they declare about Jesus, by Beelzebub and the ruler of demons, he casts out demons. What sense does that make? But these people, they know how powerful this possessed man was. They know how wild and uncontrollable and how unyielding he was. No one has ever been able to make him comply. So if he is now submitting to you, who are you? If we were afraid of him, then we definitely need to be afraid of you. But you don't ever need to be afraid of Jesus. Not because he doesn't have the power that you suspect he has, he does. But because he only has plans for your welfare and not for your harm. But it seems like these people's minds, unfortunately, are just stuck in this broken theology. And so they are scared of him. And the natural human response to something that scares us is to try and remove the stimulus. And so they beg Jesus to leave. They beg him to leave. In fact, the word that is translated from Greek into English as beg, parakleo, it's the same word used by the demons who begged Jesus for their lives not to banish them. It's desperation, it's frenzy. That's how badly these people want Jesus to leave. And Jesus might be fearless, but he's also respectful. He respects their decision. They have the Son of God in their midst, and they're begging him to go away. And he heeds their request. Okay, if that's what you want, I'll respect your wishes. And he heads back to the boat. Jesus has heeded the request of everyone who has begged him for something. So the demons, they begged not to be banished, but instead to be allowed to enter the swine. Tick, request granted. The local people, they begged him to leave. They begged him to leave because they were afraid. Tick, request granted. But there's one more request to come. And in a lot of ways, it might actually be like the most earnest, the most legitimate, maybe even the most deserving request. It says in verse 18, as he was getting into the boat, he being Jesus, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you. So as Jesus is climbing into the boat to sail away on the horizon, the man who has been plagued by a legion of demons begs him that he might be with him. Wherever you are, Jesus, that's where I need to be. I don't want to go anywhere without you. He begs him. It's the same word again, literally the same word. Desperation, frantic, please. And you can understand that the desperation. You don't have to be a genius to understand why he might want to stay with Jesus. The demons have been cast out, but that wasn't through the man's own doing. He was simply a bystander in his own deliverance. Jesus is the reason that the demons aren't here anymore, and Jesus is now about to sail away. And Jesus himself is actually quoted by Matthew in Matthew's gospel as having said before that when an unclean spirit leaves a person, sometimes that spirit will go and will try and get 7 more stronger spirits to try and come back and take the host again. And so this man isn't crazy for not wanting Jesus to leave. You can understand him begging Jesus, his deliverer, not to leave. So you have the demons begging to be allowed into the swine, request granted. You have the local people, stubborn and resistant to Jesus, begging him to leave, request granted. And you have the victim, the one in most need of help, the one who actually seems to want to become a follower, begging Jesus that he might be with him. Request denied. I am someone who has difficulty saying no to people. Something that I'm aware of. When I'm asked sometimes, even if it's something that I don't want to do, even if it's something that I probably shouldn't take on because I know it has the potential to compromise other things that I need to do, I can find it difficult to say no. So there's something that I've been working on recently to kind of help to move the needle a bit. And I'll say no, but I'll provide an alternative option based on what I can do. Because just, I guess, my nature, my personality, if there is a way to help, then I'd always like to try and help if possible. So I'll say no, but I'll provide an alternative option based on what I can do. So just to give you an example, every year without fail, at the end of every year and at the beginning of every new year, I tend to get inundated with a lot of calls, emails from colleagues, from lay people asking me, can you come and preach in my church? And I like preaching in other places. I like going to preach, but I feel very strongly that I have a responsibility to my own churches, and I do take that responsibility seriously. And so every Sabbath somewhere else is one less Sabbath that I can be here in Acts, or I can be in Beckton, actually overseeing the things I'm meant to be overseeing. But it can be hard to say no for a variety of reasons that I won't go into now, but it can be hard to say no. So now, what I say is, I'm sorry, I can't give you a Sabbath date, but if you happen to have any online services such as Wednesday night prayer meeting or Friday night Vespers, things that are on Zoom, then I will give you a date. I will speak for you then. Now, the reality is, not everybody is happy with this. Some people are still clearly disappointed or disgruntled. But the main thing for me is they don't feel like they've just been rebuffed and shut down. And I know that I've attempted to make provision for them. It's not what they wanted. They wanted the message on Sabbath, and I'm offering it on Wednesday. But ultimately, whichever day they get the message, it's going to be the same message. And so this is the alternative solution that allows my churches to get their food, but will also allow your church to get some food. Now, I don't think that Jesus is a person who had difficulty saying no, because after all, he's fearless. But Jesus doesn't really say no to people. I mean, if you go through the Gospel of Mark, and I invite you to do this as an exercise, it can be a nice thing to do a Sabbath afternoon, but if you go through the Gospel of Mark, and I've done this, if you go through it and you look at Jesus' interactions with the various people that he encounters, he never says no to any request that's made of him. So people want to be healed, they want to be restored, and they come to him, even if it's late at night after a really long day, he says, bring them. Even if it's going to blow his cover and mean that he can't move with the anonymity that he kind of needs to move under to achieve his goals, bring them. Enemies asked to come and engage, that they can ask their questions and try and trick him and try and trip him up. Bring them. Children asked to come and see him, and the disciples say, no, 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 he's too important, he's too busy for this. And Jesus said, what are you doing? Bring them. Even when James and John, the disciples, asked to sit at his right hand and his left hand in glory, he doesn't actually say no. He says to them, you don't really know what you're asking, and the cup that has to be drunk to get that, you need to think if you can handle that. But to be honest with you, it's not really up to me to grant this request. But he doesn't actually say no. He never says no to any request. And it's important that we understand this, because this speaks to a consistent pattern, a consistent culture within Jesus's ministry. So when this formerly possessed man, who has been through hell, begs Jesus to be with him, in isolation, it can kind of look like Jesus is saying no. But he isn't really saying no. But as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him, but Jesus refused and said to him, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he is showing you. Jesus isn't saying no, he's giving him an alternative solution. So this is like, I can't preach on Sabbath, but I can preach on Wednesday. It's not what you asked for, but it's the same sermon, the same outcome. Jesus says to him, I can't stay here with you. I mean, there are other people like you who also need my help. But if you go to the people who love you and who want a shared faith experience, you will still get what you're looking for. I mean, but I don't want Wednesday sermon. I want Sabbath sermon. It's the equivalent experience. It's the same. There's a word that we have now that they didn't have then, but if Jesus was speaking today and was sending this man to the people who love him in order that they can have a shared faith experience together, he could simply say, go to your church. Because what is a church if not a community of your friends and your loved ones that is built on a common understanding of what God has done for them and what mercy he has shown to them? I genuinely don't think I could actually come up with a better description for what church is meant to be, how church is meant to feel, what it's meant to look like, than a community of loved ones built on an understanding of what God has done for them and what mercy he has shown for them. I would struggle to come up with a better description. Jesus is entrusting this man's pastoral needs into the hands of people who love him and can share a faith journey with him. Jesus isn't saying no to an earnest request, because Jesus doesn't say no to earnest requests, at least not in the Gospel of Mark. This is Jesus saying, I can't do this, but here is an equivalent solution. You might not realize it's the same, but it's the same. You might not think it's what you wanted, but it's the same. An imperfect group of people seeking God is trusted by Jesus to do the same pastoral job as Jesus himself. An imperfect group of people seeking God is trusted by Jesus to be an effective buttress against the enemy coming back to wreak havoc into this man's life. When you become a Christian, Jesus is saying to you, I can't physically be here with you, but this group of people over here who care about you and understand what God does in people's lives, they're not just the next best thing, they're the equivalent thing. And this might seem hard to accept because we all know that the church is imperfect and defective. And that's the church, that's this church, that's every church. It's no secret. We're not speaking badly by saying that. We all know it. But Jesus entrusts people like this man into the care of people who are trying to have a faith experience. And he's happy with that. At the start of the new year, I want to remind you of the importance of the church in our lives. The importance that, for me, it just leaps literally off the pages of this story. You see, when you read accounts like this, episodes like this in the New Testament, in the Gospels, you should be able to identify elements of yourself in the people that Jesus encounters. Even someone as wild, someone as troubled as this man, you should be able to identify elements of you in them. This man in the story is me. He's you. Someone who finds himself in a situation that he can't fix for himself. Someone whose circumstances have affected his relationships and his ability to relate to the people around him. Someone who is experiencing loneliness and isolation. Someone whose life isn't where he wants it to be. Absolutely everyone can identify with at least one of those elements that define his situation. You are him. And like him, you need to be plugged into a group of people who care about you and are seeking God. And you can't just do that once in a while. You can't do that exclusively from afar. The first thing that Jesus says to this man is, go. It requires some going. You have to go. If you have been an arm's length believer, then I want you to change that this year. And that's not for my benefit. It's for your benefit. Because you are the man to whom Jesus says, go. I am the man. You are the man. But you're not just the man in this story. You're also the people. You might look at him and identify things in him that are in you. You might see yourself as the man who has to go and find the community. But to somebody else, you are a part of the community that they have to go and find. And if you're not present and dialed in, then they can't get the pastoral experience that they need. It's interesting because the people that Jesus tells this man to go and find, he doesn't say anything about how good they are. He doesn't make reference to whether they have problems of their own. He doesn't check about if they're, well, the last person that should be helping somebody else. He doesn't make reference to whether their plate is full right now and I've got enough going on in my life. And there's no mention of a pastor or a worship leader, of a priest, of a Levite, of a point person to take the lead. It's simply go and find them, and it will help your life. I am them, and you are them. Figuratively, you can be the possessed man, and I can be the people, and vice versa. But only Jesus can be the Jesus in the story. And that's because there are certain things that only Jesus can do for you. For the possessed man in the story, only Jesus could set him free. Only Jesus could make him new. Only Jesus could put him back together again. We can't take Jesus's place. But he has given us the ability to do certain things on his behalf. Paul writes famously in Romans, "For as in one body we have many members, and not all the members have the same function. So we, who are many, are one body in Christ, and individually we are members one of another. We have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Prophecy in proportion to faith, ministry in ministering, the teacher in teaching, the exhorter in exhortation, the giver in generosity, the leader in diligence, the compassionate in cheerfulness." Paul is coloring in the picture that Mark has sketched for us in the gospel. The picture of Jesus saying, "I have to go, but they will do the same things for you that I would do for you." The prophecy, the ministry, the teaching, the exhortation, the giving, the leading, the compassion. It's the same. Whether it's me or whether it's them, it's the same. Jesus entrusts your pastoral needs and your well-being, no matter how great these needs are. Jesus entrusts them into the hands of people with a shared faith experience. Now, those hands haven't always done a perfect job, but those are the hands that Jesus trusts. He trusts your hands to look after me. He trusts my hands to look after you. I don't trust my hands to look after you, but he trusts my hands to look after you. And I trust him. Believe it or not, like it or not, to Jesus, the care that we have the capacity to show one another is as good as if he were doing it himself. And I still want to be a part of that, regularly and consistently, wholeheartedly, not half-heartedly, in word and in deed. And I hope that you do too.